Makeda's tray shattered across the marble floor just as the chandelier above the VIP stage snapped loose. Gasps ripped through the ballroom. Wealthy guests stumbled back in panic. No one moved toward the man standing directly beneath the falling glass. Tendaji Okoro, the untouchable CEO, everyone worshipped from a safe distance. No one except the ugly girl they had mocked all night. Makeda ran. She slammed into Tendaji with all her strength, just as crystal and metal exploded behind them. Her body hit the floor first. Pain tore through her arm. The room went silent, because the invisible girl no one wanted to see had just saved the most powerful man in the city. Before we go on, tell me honestly, if the person everyone looked down on became the one who saved a life, would you admit you were wrong or stay silent out of pride? And where are you watching from today? Drop your country and local time in the comments. If you enjoy emotional, dramatic stories filled with shocking twists, justice and healing, subscribe and stay with me. For 3 full seconds after the chandelier crashed, no one in the ballroom seemed able to breathe. Then sound returned all at once. A woman screamed. Glass kept skittering across the marble in bright, deadly fragments. Men in suits lunged backward too late, as if fear had only reached their legs after the danger was over. Security guards rushed toward the stage in confusion, shouting into earpieces, pushing guests aside, looking everywhere except at the young woman on the floor whose body had taken the force of the fall. Makeda tried to lift herself. Pain shot through her left arm so sharply that her vision blurred white. Her palm slid on the marble. Tiny pieces of crystal had scattered into her skin. Her knee burned. Her breath came in short, shocked pulls, but her first instinct was not to check herself. It was to look for the man she had thrown out of the way. Tendaji Okoro had landed several feet from the broken center of the stage. One of his guards was already crouching beside him, another shielding him with his own body, as if a second attack might come. Tendaji's black suit was dusted with glittering glass. His shoulder had struck the floor hard, but he was alive. Uncut. Breathing. His eyes found Makeda immediately. Not the guards. Not the guests. Not the journalists pulling out phones from behind overturned chairs. Makeda. She saw the exact moment he understood what had happened. His face disciplined and unreadable, a second before shifted with something raw. Shock first. Then disbelief. Then a hard, unsettling focus, as if every lie in the room had suddenly been stripped away, and he was staring at the only true thing left. Makeda tried to sit up properly. A sharp voice cut through the chaos before she could. She pushed him. The accusation came from one of the event coordinators, a woman in a gold dress whose smile had vanished with the chandelier. She pointed at Makeda with manic certainty, grateful to have found a target for the crowd's fear. "I saw her run at him," the woman cried. She forced herself into the VIP area. That was all it took. Fear, especially among the rich, always needed someone poor to blame. Several guests immediately turned toward Makeda with disgust instead of gratitude. Their eyes moved over her cheap uniform, her scuffed shoes, the birthmark on her face they had laughed at over cocktails, and found the story they wanted. A desperate girl, an attention seeker, a nobody who had reached above her place. "She must have planned this," a man muttered. "These girls always want something," another said. "Search her bag," someone snapped. Makeda stared at them, still half on the floor, too stunned to answer for a moment. Her pulse hammered in her ears. She had just thrown herself under falling metal and glass, and somehow she had become the danger. One of the guards grabbed her by the wrist. Not gently. Makeda gasped as pain tore through her injured arm. "Please," she whispered instinctively, twisting away. "My arm." "Don't move." The guard barked. "She saved him," said a trembling voice from near the catering station. It was one of the kitchen boys no older than 16. He had seen the whole thing. But the moment a senior manager glared at him, he lowered his eyes and said nothing else. Makeda felt something cold move through her chest. That was how truth died in places like this. Not always through violence, sometimes through cowardice, through silence, through people deciding that safety mattered more than honesty. She bit back the pain and forced herself to speak louder. "The chandelier cable snapped," she said. "I saw it shaking. He was under it." The gold-dressed coordinator laughed harshly. "And you expect us to believe that you noticed what trained staff did not?" Makeda met her eyes. Yes, the answer was simple. Too simple for the room. Too clean. A murmur moved through the guests. The guard tightened his grip. Then Tendaji stood. Enough. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The single word cut through the ballroom with more force than the chandelier had. Every movement around him slowed. Every excuse held itself back. Tendaji's authority was not theatrical. It was colder than that. Cleaner. The kind built over years of making rooms obey before they had decided to. He shrugged off the hands trying to steady him and took one step toward Makeda. Then another. His chief of security moved with him. "Sir, we need to get you out now." In a moment, Tendaji said. His gaze never left Makeda. Up close, he looked even more dangerous than he had from a distance earlier that evening. Tall, controlled. Every line of his face sharpened by anger he had not yet chosen where to place. A small cut marked the side of his neck where a flying shard had grazed him. Blood, thin and bright, traced his dark skin in one narrow line. Makeda could not stop staring at it. He noticed. "You're bleeding too," he said. It took her a second to realize he meant her. Blood had run down from the cuts in her hand and arm, dripping onto the ruined white glove she still wore on one side. Her sleeve was torn. Her breathing remained uneven. The guard holding her wrist finally released it. Makeda almost collapsed again from the sudden loss of pressure. Tendaji crouched in front of her. The entire ballroom seemed to lean in. "Look at me," he said. She did. "Did you push me?" he asked quietly. "Or did you save my life?" The question should have insulted her. It should have made her angrier than she already was. But his tone was not mocking. It was deliberate. He was giving her something the others had not the right to answer for herself. Makeda swallowed. "I saved your life." The room waited. Her voice steadied. "I saw the chain shaking above the stage. I thought no one else had noticed. I ran because there wasn't time." Tendaji held her gaze a second longer, as if measuring not just the words, but the soul behind them. Then he stood and faced the room. "She saved my life." No one spoke. He turned to the security team. "Get a medic, now." The guard beside him hesitated. "Sir, protocol says now." The man moved. Tendaji then looked toward the event staff, his expression turning glacial. "Seal the ballroom. No one leaves until I have a full report on that fixture, the installation crew, and every person who signed off on tonight's safety inspection." Several faces changed color at once. Makeda noticed that. Even through the pain, even through the humiliation, she noticed. Because some people looked frightened in the ordinary way people did after an accident. Others looked frightened in a different way, as if the accident had not surprised them enough, as if they were terrified of what a deeper investigation might uncover. Her gaze landed briefly on a man near the back of the hall, speaking sharply into his phone. He wore an executive badge, expensive watch, calm face, but sweat had gathered near his temple. When he realized Makeda was looking at him, he turned away too quickly. Something about that stayed with her. The medic arrived with a first aid kit and a stretcher team, but Makeda shook her head at the stretcher. "I can walk." "You may have a fracture," the medic said. "I said I can walk." Pride was a poor substitute for dignity, but sometimes it was all humiliation left behind. As the medic cleaned the cuts in her hand, Makeda heard the whispers start again around her, softer now, more poisonous because they had to hide behind politeness. "She's clever. She'll get compensation." She knew exactly what she was doing. Girls like that don't do anything for free. Makeda kept her eyes lowered, not because she accepted their judgment, but because she had learned years ago that some people became crueler when they saw pain on a poor woman's face. Then a silk heel stopped in front of her. Makeda looked up. The woman standing there was beautiful in the polished, expensive way magazines liked to worship. Her gown fit like poured gold, diamonds burned at her throat. Her makeup was untouched by the panic. Only her eyes betrayed her cold, furious, and fixed on Makeda with the hostility of someone who had already decided she should not exist. Zinla! Makeda had seen her earlier on the arm of Tendaji Okoro and understood immediately that this was no assistant, no executive, no cousin. This was the woman who belonged beside powerful men because she knew how power liked to be seen. Zinla smiled. It was not a kind smile. "You've made quite an impression," she said. Makeda said nothing. Zinla's gaze traveled over her torn sleeve, her cheap shoes, the blood on her skin, the birthmark on her face. When she spoke again, her voice was soft enough that only Makeda could hear. "Girls like you are always the same. One dramatic move and suddenly you think the world owes you a seat at the table." Makeda lifted her chin despite the ache in her body. "I didn't ask for a seat." Zinla's smile thinned. "No. That's what makes your kind dangerous. You wait for pity to invite you in." Before Makeda could answer, Tendaji's voice came from behind Zinla. "She needs treatment, not interrogation." Zinla turned, instantly smoothing her expression into concern. "I was only checking on her." Tendaji did not respond to that lie. He simply looked at Makeda, then at the medic wrapping her arm. "Take her to the private clinic wing," he said. "Use my driver." Makeda blinked. "That's not necessary." "It is." Their eyes met again. There was no warmth yet, no softness, only something more unsettling attention. Serious, direct attention from a man used to being lied to, manipulated, admired, desired, and feared. He looked at her as if trying to understand why the one person in the room with the least reason to risk herself had been the only one who did. Makeda stood slowly fighting dizziness. "I have to go home after," she said. "My mother is waiting." "Then after treatment you'll go home," Tendaji replied. "But not before." The medic finished securing the bandage. The ballroom still smelled of perfume dust and broken crystal. Somewhere behind them, investigators had begun photographing the collapsed rigging. Security kept guests in tight clusters. The luxury of the evening had cracked open, and beneath it, something uglier was showing. Makeda felt it. Not just the cruelty, the fear. This had not been only an accident. She could not prove it yet. Perhaps she did not even fully believe it. But the shaking chain she had noticed the executive sweating near the back. The panic in certain faces when Tendaji ordered an investigation, it all pressed against her instincts like a warning. As she took her first step toward the exit, pain stabbing through her arm, she heard two staff members whisper behind a curtain near the service corridor. This was supposed to be clean. Then pray she saw nothing. Makeda stopped breathing. But when she turned, the voices were gone. Only the corridor remained half dark and empty like a mouth that had spoken and swallowed its own secret. And for the first time that night, Makeda realized something far more dangerous than falling glass had just begun. By the next morning, every major news page in Lagos had a version of the same story. Mystery waiter saves CEO at charity gala. Some headlines called Makeda brave, others called her suspicious. A few were cruel enough to use the words people had always thrown at women like her, plain, desperate, opportunistic, as if courage could not exist inside a body the world had decided not to admire. Makeda saw the headlines only because the old television in the clinic waiting room was mounted too high to ignore. She sat stiffly in a plastic chair, her left arm wrapped from wrist to elbow, her knee cleaned and bandaged her cheap handbag on her lap. Around her, private patients and family members whispered behind polished phones and expensive perfumes. Even in a clinic wing owned by Tendaji Okoro's company class, announced itself in 100 tiny ways, through the shoes people wore, through the impatience with which they glanced at her, through the assumption that she had wandered in by accident. The doctor had already confirmed that her arm was not broken, only badly bruised and cut. She should rest. She should avoid lifting heavy things. She should come back in 3 days so they could check for infection. Rest. Makeda almost laughed. Rest was a luxury for people whose rent had already been paid. Her phone buzzed with a message from her younger brother, Tino. Mama asked if you're on your way. She's pretending not to worry, so she's definitely worrying. Makeda stared at the screen and softened for the first time since the night before. Tino always knew how to say what hurt without making it heavier. She typed back quickly. I'm fine. Leaving soon. Don't let her carry the water bucket. I mean it. A second message came almost immediately. Did you really save that billionaire man? Makeda hesitated, then wrote, I saved a human being. That's all. She slipped the phone away, just as a woman in a navy suit approached her. Miss Makeda. Makeda looked up. The woman was in her 40s, neat and composed, the kind of person who moved as if she had spent years managing other people's emergencies. My name is Mrs. Nkube, she said. I'm here from the Okoro group. Mr. Okoro would like to speak with you before you leave. Makeda's spine stiffened. Why Mrs. Nkube's expression did not change. He did not explain that to me. Makeda almost refused immediately. Every instinct built by poverty warned her against rooms where powerful men summoned poor women and called it opportunity. But then she thought of the whisper she had heard behind the service corridor curtain. This was supposed to be clean. Then pray she saw nothing. She had not imagined those words. She knew she had not. And if the chandelier had not simply fallen by chance, then walking away too quickly might be its own kind of danger. So Makeda stood. I can give him 10 minutes. Mrs. Nkube gave a small nod. This way. The office they led her to was not inside the clinic, but across a connecting hallway into the administrative tower. The difference was immediate. The floors changed from practical tile to dark, polished wood. Abstract art hung on the walls. Glass panels looked out over Lagos in all its harsh contradictions. Traffic-choked roads, bright billboards, tin roofs in the distance, towers rising above neighborhoods that had been forgotten by everyone except the people forced to survive there. Makeda tried not to look impressed. She failed a little. Mrs. Nkube opened a door and stepped aside. Tendaji Okoro stood near the windows with his back to the room suit jacket. Off-white shirt sleeves rolled once at the forearms. In daylight he seemed even more formidable than he had under the chandeliers and camera flashes. There was no performance now, no gala smile, no public posture, just a man looking over a city that obeyed his signature in 100 places. He turned when he heard her. For 1 second, they simply looked at each other. Makeda noticed 2 things immediately. First, the cut on his neck had been cleaned but not covered. Second, he looked tired, not weak, not shaken, but as if anger had kept him awake and sleep had not won. Mrs. Nkube closed the door behind her. Makeda's pulse sharpened. You wanted to see me? I did. His voice was lower today, quieter. More dangerous in some ways because it no longer had a crowd to control. He gestured toward the chairs in front of his desk. Please sit. Makeda remained standing. I said 10 minutes. Something flickered in his eyes. Not offense. Recognition. Then I won't waste them, he said. That answer surprised her enough that she sat. He crossed the room and took the chair opposite hers, instead of the larger one behind the desk. It was a small choice. Makeda noticed it anyway. I owe you my life, he said. The words landed heavily because he said them without drama. Not as flattery, not as obligation, as fact. Makeda looked down at her bandaged arm. You owe me nothing. I saw danger. I moved. Most people saw danger, Tendaji said. Most people moved away. That was true. It was also something she did not want to think about because remembering the frozen faces around him made something bitter rise in her throat. He studied her for a moment. You heard what they were saying after. Makeda gave a short laugh without humor. You mean the part where they decided I was scheming before they decided I was bleeding? I mean all of it. Silence gathered between them. He did not apologize immediately, and that irritated her more than it should have. Then she realized why. She had grown used to cruelty from the poor who were desperate and from the rich who were bored. What unsettled her was that he seemed to be choosing his words carefully, as if he knew a cheap apology would insult her more than help. Finally, he said, I've already had 3 internal reports placed on my desk this morning. All 3 contradict each other. Makeda looked up sharply. One says the chandelier support failed because of faulty imported hardware. One says a junior technician ignored protocol. One says no fault can be determined until further inspection. And what do you believe? Tendaji leaned back slightly. I believe people lie fastest when they're afraid. The answer sent a small chill through her. He noticed. You think it wasn't an accident too, he said. Makeda had not planned to speak so quickly. I think someone behind the curtain said, this was supposed to be clean. And someone else answered, then pray she saw nothing. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Tendaji did not move for a second. Then he asked, why didn't you tell security? Makeda held his gaze. Because security works for the same building that signed off on the ballroom. Because last night, before the dust settled, people were already inventing reasons to make me the problem. Because I've lived long enough to know that poor witnesses are useful only until we become inconvenient. He absorbed that without interruption. That unsettled her more than defensiveness would have. I see, he said at last. No, Makeda replied quietly. Most men like you don't. Something sharp flashed across his face, but not the kind born from wounded pride. It looked closer to shame. He stood crossed to the desk and opened a slim folder. You're right, he said. Most men like me probably don't. So I decided to ask questions before assuming I understood yours. He slid a sheet of paper toward her. Makeda glanced at it, then frowned. It was not a legal waiver, not hush money, not a statement for her to sign. It was an employment offer. Temporary contract. Community Outreach Coordination Assistant. Salary higher than anything she had ever been paid. Transport allowance, medical support for 1 dependent. Review after 3 months. Makeda stared at the page, then at him. What is this a job? She almost laughed again this time, out of disbelief. You nearly die, and your solution is to hire the waitress who pushed you? The waitress who noticed danger before my executives did, he corrected. The waitress who risked herself without bargaining for reward. The waitress who, judging from the event logs and my staff background check this morning, has held 6 temporary jobs in 3 years and received excellent remarks from every supervisor except the one who said you make wealthy clients uncomfortable by being too direct. Makeda went still. You investigated me. I verify people before I trust them, or before you decide how to use them. That struck. She saw it. He folded his hands. Fair. She looked back at the offer. The salary alone could cover her mother's medication and keep Tino in school. For a dizzy second, all she could see was relief food, bought without counting coins, twice clinic visits, without excuses, rent paid before threats began. Then the dizziness passed and suspicion returned. Why me, she asked. You already know one reason. Because I saved you. That's not enough. Then what is... For the first time since she entered, Tendaji allowed the full truth of his attention to show. You see things, he said. You notice what others miss. Last night you noticed a failing support chain. You noticed the fear in that room. You noticed enough to keep quiet until you could Tell me directly. People like that are rare. Makeda's mouth tightened. People like that are usually poor because honesty is expensive. That time, a faint smile touched his face before he stopped it. It transformed him just enough to make her uneasy for an entirely different reason. He pushed a second paper toward her. This is the foundation division you'd be working under. Most of our public outreach projects are attached to housing education and emergency family relief. Makeda scanned the list. Her eyes halted on one line item. Children's Recovery Fund, disbursement review pending. A number beside it had been crossed out and retyped. Something in her chest tightened. Tendaji noticed the shift instantly. What is it? Makeda hesitated. She did not know why that figure bothered her, only that during one of her catering shifts last month, while delivering tea to a side office at another Okoro group event, she had glimpsed a similar ledger on an unattended screen. Same fund name, different total. A poor girl's mind learned to keep strange numbers the way a hungry body remembered the smell of food. That amount, she said slowly. I think I've seen it before. Tendaji's eyes sharpened. Where I'm not sure, she admitted. At another event, on a screen. The number was different. He did not dismiss her. Different how lower on the line I saw. Or maybe the amount transferred out was lower. I only saw it for a second. He was silent, but she could almost hear his thoughts aligning. There it was again, that feeling from the ballroom. The sense that the falling chandelier might be tied to something uglier beneath the company's polished surface. Makeda set the papers down. I have a mother with a weak heart, and a brother who still believes hard work changes everything, she said. So listen carefully, Mr. Okoro. I don't want pity. I don't want gossip money. And I will not take a job so people can say you rewarded me for making a spectacle. His gaze never wavered. Then take it because you earned my respect. The words hit harder than she expected. No one in power had ever said that to her without wanting something in return. That was exactly why she still did not trust it. Outside the office windows, Lagos burned beneath the noon sun, beautiful, crowded, merciless. Inside, Makeda looked at the contract, then at the man who had offered it. And though neither of them said it yet, both could already feel the truth drawing closer. The falling chandelier was only the first crack. What came next would not be held up by wires and crystal. It would be held up by lies. Makeda did not accept the job that day. She took the contract home folded neatly inside her bag as if keeping it flat could stop it from changing her life before she had agreed to let it. By the time she reached the narrow street where she lived, the sun had shifted low enough to pour heat into the rusted roofs and broken gutters. Children kicked a half-flat ball between puddles. A woman argued with a water seller over a missing coin. Two teenage boys stopped mid-conversation when they saw Makeda's bandaged arm, then quickly looked away with the awkward respect people gave pain when they did not know whether to ask about it. Inside the one-room house, the air smelled of boiled cassava medicine and the faint dampness that never fully left the walls during rainy season. Her mother Adesua was sitting upright on the bed with a wrapper around her thin shoulders and worry already in her eyes. Tino rose from the stool near the window so fast he nearly knocked it over. You're late, I can see that, Makeda said, forcing lightness into her voice. Then Adesua saw the bandages properly. The spoon slipped from her hand and hit the metal bowl with a sharp, accusing sound. What happened? Makeda should have lied. A small lie. A safe lie. Something that would not set fear loose in a woman whose heart had already survived too much. But she was too tired to build one. So she told them. Not every detail. Not the whispers, not the humiliation, not the way people had looked at her as if bleeding on their marble floor had been its own offense. But enough. Enough for Tino's eyes to widen in stunned admiration and for Adesua's face to go pale with a different kind of fear. When Makeda finally placed the contract on the bed between them, the room fell quiet. Tino touched the top sheet as if it might burn him. This is real. It looks real, Makeda said. It's from Tendaji Okoro's company. I can read Tino. He grinned for half a second, then stopped when he saw that she was not smiling. Adesua did not touch the papers at all. She only looked at Makeda, and that was worse somehow. Her mother had the kind of face that had learned to speak truths other people preferred not to name. Power never invites the poor close without a reason, she said softly. Makeda sank into the chair near the door. Her whole body ached now that the day's forced calm had worn off. I know. Tino frowned. Maybe the reason is that she saved his life. Adesua turned to him. And maybe that is exactly why powerful people become dangerous when they feel they owe someone beneath them. Tino opened his mouth, then shut it. He was young enough to still want the world to be fair, and old enough to know it rarely was. Makeda rested her head briefly against the wall. He said, I notice things. He wants me in the Foundation division. At that, something in her mother's expression changed. Not fear this time. Recognition. Makeda saw it immediately and straightened. What Adesua looked away too quickly. Mama. It may be nothing. When you say that it is never nothing, Adesua's fingers tightened over the edge of the wrapper on her lap. Years ago, before your father died, there was talk in our area about land funds and relief money. Promises made to families after the demolitions. Some people received something. Others received nothing. Records changed. Numbers changed. Men came with folders and apologies. Then other men came with threats. Makeda's pulse slowed into something colder. Why are you telling me this now? Because if this company's foundation is the same old wound wearing a new suit, then a contract may not be protection. It may be proximity to trouble. Tino looked between them. What demolitions? Neither woman answered at once. The silence in the room deepened until Makeda realized with a jolt of shame that she had grown so used to surviving the present that she had stopped asking questions about the past. Her father had died when she was young. She knew only fragments. A protest, land disputes, a night of confusion, men running, sirens. Her mother had always spoken around the truth, as if saying it aloud could call old enemies back to the door. Makeda lowered her eyes to the contract. Proximity to trouble. The word sat heavily inside her. That night, sleep did not come easily. When it did, it came broken. She dreamed of the chandelier falling again and again, except each time it was not crystal raining from the ceiling. It was paper, contracts, ledgers, medical bills, school fees, every sharp edge of poverty crashing down while people in expensive clothes stepped neatly out of the way. In the morning she signed, not because she trusted Tendaji Okoro, not because she believed in miracles, because medicine still had to be bought, because Tino still had to stay in school, because whatever rot lay inside that company, it was already close enough to touch her life. Better perhaps to step toward the fire with open eyes than wait for it to find her again. 3 days later, Makeda entered Okoro Group headquarters through the staff entrance, wearing the plain navy blouse Mrs. Nakube had arranged for her and the only black skirt she owned that had no visible tear. The building rose above the city like a polished declaration that wealth had its own climate. Glass, steel, air conditioning cold enough to make her skin tighten. The lobby floor shone so brightly she could see a distorted version of herself in it. Slender frame, careful posture, birthmark dark against one side of her face. Eyes sharper than they had been a week ago. Everyone else looked effortless. Receptionists with perfect smiles. Executives with phones pressed to their ears and urgency wrapped around them like perfume. Assistants gliding in shoes that clicked like confidence. Makeda looked like what she was, someone who had climbed into a world not built for her. And the world noticed. Not openly, not at first. But in the way conversations paused when she passed, in the way eyes slid over her clothes and returned to her face, in the way one woman near the elevator lowered her voice, and still not low enough. "That's her," she whispered. "The gala girl." "Yes, the one who Makeda kept walking." Mrs. Nakubi met her on the 20th floor and handed her an access card. "Community and Foundation Division is 3 corridors down," she said. "You'll report directly to Ms. Dlamini for daily operations. Mr. Okoro asked to be updated after your first week, not before." Makeda glanced at her. "He asked that specifically?" "He did." That unsettled her more than it comforted her. Ms. Dlamini turned out to be a brisk, middle-aged woman with silver-framed glasses and no patience for nonsense. Makeda liked her within 4 minutes, which was dangerous. Liking people too soon often became expensive later. "You can type, yes. Use spreadsheets, yes. Argue," Makeda blinked. "When necessary." "Good. People here hide mistakes behind polished language. I prefer blunt eyes." Ms. Dlamini handed her 3 files at once. "Sit there. Read those. Flag anything that looks inconsistent." Makeda sat at a workstation near the side wall, grateful that work had begun before pity could. Numbers steadied her. Lists steadied her. Tasks that could be done 1 line at a time felt honest in a way human beings often did not. For the first 2 hours, no one spoke to her unless they had to. By the third, that changed. A tall woman in a cream suit appeared beside her desk, carrying an elegance so deliberate it felt sharpened for war. Her skin glowed beneath flawless makeup. Her hair was sculpted into glossy precision. Diamonds flashed at her ears. She did not need introduction. Zinla. She smiled the way a blade might smile if it learned how. So she said softly, "They really let you in." Makeda rose from her chair out of instinct, not deference. "I work here now." Zinla's gaze drifted over her blouse skirt. Practical shoes, then returned to her face and lingered on the birthmark with exquisite cruelty. "How inspirational," she murmured. "The company is doing charity from the inside now." Makeda felt heat rise under her skin, but her voice stayed level. "If you came to insult me, you've already succeeded. If you came for something else, you can say it clearly." That seemed to amuse Zinla. "Oh, you do have a spine. Tendaji must find that refreshing." There it was. The real point. Makeda met her eyes. "I didn't ask to be discussed." "No," Zinla replied. "That's the clever part. Girls like you never ask. You appear hurt, noble, quiet. Men with savior complexes do the rest themselves." Before Makeda could answer, Ms. Dlamini's voice cut in from across the room. "Is there a work-related issue here?" Zinla turned smile instantly polished into public grace. "None at all. I was only welcoming our newest employee." "Then you're done," Ms. Dlamini said. A pulse of silence moved through the office. Zinla's eyes cooled. She looked back at Makeda and lowered her voice. "Enjoy the attention while it lasts. In buildings like this, women who arrive by accident rarely survive on merit." Then she walked away. Makeda sat again slowly, hands colder than before. By late afternoon, she had flagged 2 discrepancies in a housing grant report and 1 missing invoice reference in an emergency medical relief summary. Small things. Enough to prove she belonged at a desk, if not yet in anyone's good graces. Then she opened the 4th file. Children's Recovery Fund Revised Disbursement Overview. Her breath caught. There it was again. The same fund name she had seen on Tendaji's desk. The same uneasy wrongness in the numbers. 2 pages showed 1 total amount allocated. A later page showed a reduced field entry with no matching authorization note. Another page listed a donor transfer that had supposedly occurred 3 days before the donor's public pledge date. Makeda read the lines twice. Then a 3rd time. It was not a typo. It was not sloppiness. It was the kind of inconsistency created when money moved where it should not. And someone trusted the poor not to understand columns well enough to notice. She looked up instinctively. Across the office, through a glass partition, a man stood speaking into his phone. Tall, immaculate suit, smooth, deliberate movements, gold cufflinks, calm face built for boardrooms and lies. Kwame Biko. Makeda recognized him at once, not because she had met him, because he was the sweating executive she had seen near the back of the ballroom on the night the chandelier fell. As if sensing her gaze, Kwame turned. Their eyes met through the glass. His expression did not change, but he ended the call immediately and smiled. It was a small smile, polite, controlled, the kind a man wore when he wanted to tell you he had noticed your notice. A chill moved down Makeda's spine. Then her computer screen flickered. The file vanished. A red warning box replaced it. Access denied, document restricted. Makeda stared. She had not clicked out, had not touched anything except the page scroll. Someone somewhere had just cut her off in real time. And from across the glass partition, Kwame Biko gave her the slightest nod before walking away. Makeda remained frozen for 2 full seconds after the red warning box appeared on her screen. Access denied, document restricted. The words glowed back at her with mechanical indifference, but nothing about what had just happened felt mechanical. She had been inside the file. She had been reading it. Then, the exact moment Kwame Biko noticed her attention, the door had slammed shut. Not on a folder. On her. Slowly, carefully, Makeda moved the cursor as if calm could still protect her. She clicked once, then again. The same message remained. She tried to reopen the document from the shared directory. Nothing. Only restricted access. Around her, keyboards clicked. Printers hummed. Phones vibrated across polished desks. The office continued breathing like a machine too large to care about one woman's sudden chill. But Makeda felt the air differently now. Warmer near her face, colder at the back of her neck. The way a room felt when danger had chosen not to reveal itself fully yet. Ms. Dlamini returned from a meeting 10 minutes later, carrying a stack of folders under one arm. "You look like the page insulted your ancestors," she said dryly. Makeda turned her screen slightly. "This file closed while I was reading it." Ms. Dlamini bent, adjusted her glasses, and frowned. "That's strange. It listed numbers that didn't match the earlier summary." At that, the older woman's expression sharpened. "What numbers?" Makeda explained quietly. 2 versions of the same allocation. Amount 1 transfer timeline that did not fit the donor's public pledge date, missing authorization notes. As she spoke, Ms. Dlamini's mouth set into a thin line. "You're sure Makeda met her eyes?" "Yes." "Did anyone speak to you before the file vanished?" "No. That wasn't my question." Makeda hesitated, then glanced toward the glass partition. Kwame Biko saw me reading it. Ms. Dlamini went very still. That more than anything confirmed Makeda's fear. "Say nothing about this to anyone else for now," Ms. Dlamini said at last. The caution in her voice was not casual. It was the kind grown adults used only when experience had taught them that truth without strategy could get people crushed. Makeda lowered her voice further. "You think the file was pulled because I noticed something?" "I think," Ms. Dlamini replied, straightening slowly, "that this building has excellent technology and terrible habits. Should I tell Mr. Okoro?" The older woman studied her for a moment. "If you tell him, do it directly. Not by email, not through assistants, and not where other people can overhear." She gathered the folders more tightly under her arm. "Until then, keep your face empty." Makeda almost smiled, despite herself. "My face has never earned me much. Empty should be easy." For the first time, Ms. Dlamini's expression softened a fraction. "That is exactly why you may survive here." She walked away before Makeda could ask what she meant. By the end of the workday, the ordinary weight of office routine had returned around her, but nothing felt ordinary inside her anymore. She caught herself noticing details with a sharper kind of caution, the way some staff lowered their voices when Kwame passed. The way Zinle's assistant entered the executive corridor without signing the visitor tablet, the way a finance clerk quickly minimized a spreadsheet when Makeda stopped near his desk, even though she had no authority over him. It was a building full of polished surfaces and frightened instincts. When the clock neared 6, most junior staff began gathering their bags. Makeda stayed seated, pretending to review an outreach memo until the aisle near her workstation emptied. Then she stood. The executive floor was quieter at dusk. The kind of quiet, expensive buildings preferred air-conditioned, carpeted, hushed enough to make footsteps feel like confessions under science. She took the corridor Mrs. Nakube had pointed out that morning and stopped outside a frosted glass door marked T. Okoro, Group Chief Executive Officer. A receptionist remained at the outer desk, typing with the clean speed of someone who feared mistakes. "I need to speak to Mr. Okoro," Makeda said. The receptionist looked up, recognition flashing too quickly to hide. "Do you have an appointment?" "No." "Then you'll need to email." He told me to report concerns directly if necessary. That was not exactly what he had said, but it was close enough to truth to carry weight. The receptionist hesitated, glanced at the inner office door, then picked up the phone. "So Miss Makeda is here. She says it's important." A pause. "Then, yes, sir." She set the receiver down. "You can go in." Makeda stepped through the door with her shoulders squared. Tendaji stood near a long conference table, scattered with reports, his jacket off again. Tie loosened this time. Evening light from the floor-to-ceiling windows stretched gold across the room and carved exhaustion into the lines around his eyes. He looked like a man who had spent the entire day tearing through lies and found new layers beneath each one. When he saw her, his expression shifted not to surprise exactly, but to alertness. "What happened?" Makeda noticed that. He did not ask why she was there. He asked what had happened. "I found something in a Children's Recovery Fund file," she said. He motioned for the door to be shut. She closed it behind her. Then she told him everything. The mismatched totals, the donor timeline, the missing authorization note, the sudden restriction notice. Kwame, seeing her read the file. "Ms. Dlamini's warning." Tendaji did not interrupt once. When she finished, silence settled over the office. But it was not empty silence. It was the kind that forms when a truth lands where it was already suspected. He went to his desk, opened a secure drawer, and removed a thin folder. "You're not the first irregularity I've seen," he said. Makeda's pulse quickened. "So you already knew." "I knew something was wrong. Not how much, not how close." He placed several photocopied pages in front of her. Different fund, same pattern, repeated adjustments, backdated approvals, missing references that magically reappear after quarterly reviews. Makeda stared at the pages. "Why hasn't anyone been arrested?" "Because suspicion is not evidence." His jaw tightened. "And because the people who sign off on financial reviews have spent years earning trust before learning how to steal inside it." Makeda looked up sharply. "Kwame." Tendaji did not answer immediately. That was answer enough. He crossed his arms. "Kwame Biko has been with my group since before my father died. He understands every department, every internal process, every board weakness. If he is involved, he won't be sloppy." "He wasn't sloppy," Makeda said quietly. "He just didn't expect someone like me to notice." Something unreadable flickered across Tendaji's face. Respect, perhaps. Anger, too. Not at her. At the truth of what she had just said. No, he admitted. He probably didn't. The city glowed outside the windows, now headlights beginning to thread the roads below like restless veins. Makeda became aware all at once of how strange this was, a poor girl from a leaking one-room house, standing in the private office of one of the most powerful men in Lagos, discussing fraud hidden inside millions she would never touch. And yet the strangest part was not the money. It was the trust, fragile and dangerous, forming in the gap between them. Tendaji walked back to the table. "There's more." Makeda's spine tightened. The chandelier inspection report from the gala was falsified. For a second, she forgot to breathe. It wasn't an accident. I'm not prepared to say that publicly yet, but the sign-off time was altered and the subcontractor listed on the maintenance approval doesn't exist. A cold wave moved through her chest. Then someone meant for that chandelier to fall. Yes, and you still came to work like nothing happened. His gaze hardened. Men like Kwame survive because they count on panic. I don't panic. Makeda almost snapped that ordinary people died while powerful men measured their pride. But she stopped herself. His face told her something else, something steadier, more dangerous than arrogance. He was furious. Controlled, but furious. And suddenly she understood that whatever affection, loyalty, or history had once tied him to Kwame was now at war with something stronger insult. Betrayal. The kind that powerful men never forgave because it made them look blind. There's another problem, Makeda said. He waited. Zinle. His expression changed only slightly, but Makeda caught it. Not softening. More like fatigue entering an old wound. She was in the foundation office today. Makeda continued. She made it very clear she thinks I'm here because of you. She makes many things clear when threatened. That sounded practiced. It is. The answer came too quickly, too flat. Makeda studied him. She's been interfering in company matters for a long time. His silence stretched just enough to confirm it. Then he said, Zinle is my fiancé in the eyes of the public. That has made some people in this company eager to impress her. It does not mean she has authority. In this building, Makeda said softly, those are not the same thing. For a moment, something almost like a bitter smile touched his mouth. No, they're not. The room grew quieter. Neither of them moved away from the truth now standing between them. Kwame had motive access and reach. The foundation money was dirty. The chandelier had been rigged. And Zinle, whether directly involved or not, was a loose wire running too close to everything dangerous. Makeda should have felt afraid. She did feel afraid. But underneath the fear was something else, something more dangerous than fear. Conviction. Tell me what you need me to do, she said. Tendaji looked at her for a long moment as if weighing the cost of letting her step deeper into the fire. When he spoke, his voice was lower than before. I need you to keep noticing. She held his gaze. And I need you, he added, to trust that if I bring you closer to this, I will not let them destroy you for it. Makeda should not have believed him. A wise woman would not have, but wisdom and necessity rarely walked hand in hand. And in his eyes she saw no pity, no spectacle, no patronizing gratitude, only a promise made by a man who had finally found betrayal close enough to taste. So she nodded once. Neither of them heard the soft click outside the office door. Neither of them saw the shadow pause on the other side of the frosted glass. If they had, they might have recognized the silhouette instantly. Zinle, standing still long enough to hear just enough, and smiling to herself before she walked away. From that evening on, Makeda's life split into two versions of itself. In one version, the one the building was allowed to see, she was a newly hired foundation assistant with careful posture, quiet answers, and no visible ambition beyond doing her work well. She arrived on time. She kept her files organized. She avoided executive corridors unless called. When people stared too long at the birthmark on her face, or let their eyes linger with that familiar mix of curiosity and contempt, she behaved as though she had long ago stopped noticing. In the other version, the hidden one, she became Tendaji Okoro's eyes in the corners of the company that powerful men often overlooked because they assumed numbers hid safely behind glass. She noticed everything. Which finance clerk grew nervous when old donor records were requested? Which assistant printed documents twice, then shredded one copy without logging it? Which managers became suddenly polite when Kwame Biko's name entered a conversation and suddenly mute when it remained too long? And beneath it all, like perfume spilled over rot, she noticed fear. It did not take long for fear to notice her back. 3 days after her conversation with Tendaji, Makeda found the first warning. It was waiting on her desk when she returned from delivering signed outreach forms to legal an envelope with no name, no stamp, no company marking. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Girls who climb too high are the first to fall. No signature, no threat spelled out, just enough ugliness to reach into memory and wake every old humiliation she had ever swallowed. Makeda folded the note once, then twice, and slipped it into her bag. When Ms. Dlamini asked why her face looked colder than usual, Makeda only said, "Someone wants me cautious." Ms. Dlamini studied her for a moment too long. "Then be cautious, but don't be obedient." That evening, after most of the office had emptied, Makeda took the note to Tendaji's office. He read it in silence. Then he read it again. The quiet around him changed. Makeda was beginning to recognize the shades of his anger. Public anger from him was sharp and brief, meant to establish control. This was different. This was private anger, the kind that did not flare, the kind that settled into the body like a decision. "Who touched your desk today?" he asked. "I don't know. Who had access to your floor?" "Half the company if they wanted it badly enough." He set the paper down carefully. Too carefully. "I can assign security to walk you in and out." Makeda shook her head immediately. That would tell everyone exactly where to strike. His eyes narrowed not in disagreement, but in reluctant recognition. "You're right. I know." Something in his mouth almost moved toward a smile. It vanished before it fully formed. He went to the window, hands braced on the sill, Legos turning copper behind him in the falling light. "I pulled archived access logs from the gala ballroom," he said. "Several were altered, but not perfectly." Makeda straightened. "You found something?" "I found that the maintenance subcontractor was routed through a holding company with ties to a procurement shell used once before." "For what?" He looked back at her. Emergency housing materials that were billed, approved, and never delivered. The answer hit hard because it confirmed the pattern she had been feeling all along. Not one theft, not one sabotage, a system. Old practiced layered deep enough that each lie fed the next. "Kwam," she said quietly. "Yes," and Zinhle Tendaji did not answer immediately. His silence had become its own language, and Makeda no longer mistook it for emptiness. "She has access to people who want my favor," he said at last. "She enjoys proximity to power. Sometimes she uses it carelessly, sometimes strategically. I still don't know which side of that line she is standing on." Makeda heard what he did not say. He had once trusted Zinhle enough to be uncertain now. That uncertainty made her more dangerous, not less. 2 days later, the company sent Makeda and 3 others from the Foundation Division to inspect a rural maternal health project outside Ibadan. One of the flagship outreach sites the Okoro group loved to parade in front of cameras. The plan had been routine until 10 minutes before departure, when Ms. Dlamini informed Makeda that Tendaji himself would join the trip because of review priorities. Review priorities. It was the kind of phrase corporations used when truth needed a respectable coat. The drive out of Lagos stretched long beneath a sky heavy with low grey clouds. The company convoy consisted of 1 executive SUV, 1 smaller vehicle for staff, and a pickup with site supplies. Makeda sat by the window in the staff car, files on her lap, pretending to review clinic inventories while her mind tracked the changed pattern. Tendaji did not make unnecessary appearances. If he was joining a field visit now, it meant one of two things. Either he wanted to inspect the project personally because he suspected more theft, or he wanted Makeda away from the building because he suspected she was safer where office walls could not listen. The second thought unsettled her more. By the time they reached the maternal clinic, the first rain had begun. It was not yet a storm, but the wind had changed. Sheets of silver moved across the hills beyond the village. The clinic itself stood solid and recently painted. Though Makeda immediately noticed things the glossy reports had not mentioned. 2 solar panels cracked at the corners. 1 medicine cabinet lock rusted, despite the claim of recent replacement delivery records signed with the same handwriting across multiple dates. They worked through the afternoon with local staff checking supplies, speaking with nurses comparing actual stock against the numbers filed in Lagos. Tendaji moved through the clinic with direct, unsettling efficiency. He listened more than he spoke, asked simple questions in a voice that made lies uncomfortable, knew enough about budgets, timelines, and procurement chains to make even minor inconsistencies feel exposed. Makeda saw the nurses relax around him when they realized he was not there for photographs. That surprised her. It should not have, but it did. By dusk, the rain had become violent. Road conditions made immediate return unsafe, so the team was redirected to a project guest lodge 20 minutes away. An old colonial structure renovated into something halfway between practical housing and executive retreat. The storm trapped them there with a force that felt almost deliberate. Trees bent under wind. Thunder rolled low and near. Electricity flickered twice before the backup generator caught. The staff were assigned separate rooms along one corridor. Tendaji took the end suite near the conference lounge. Makeda was given a small room 2 doors down from the women from finance. She had just removed her damp shoes when someone knocked. It was Tendaji. For one irrational second, her pulse stumbled. He held 2 files in one hand. "I need your eyes." She stepped back to let him in. The room was small enough that his presence seemed to fill it too completely. Dark shirt, damp at the shoulders from the rain sleeves, rolled the clean scent of soap and storm water following him in. He placed the files on the narrow desk. "These are duplicate procurement summaries from the clinic project," he said. "One submitted to the board, one pulled from archived regional records." Makeda moved beside him and opened the first file. Within minutes they found the same pattern again. Overstated equipment costs, duplicate transport charges, and a supplier listed under a name that matched a shell entity Tendaji had already been tracing. "They're bleeding the projects dry in pieces too small to trigger alarms," Makeda murmured. "Yes, and using projects no one important will ever physically inspect." "Yes." Makeda looked up at him. "You came today because you already suspected that." "I came," he said, "because after the note appeared on your desk, I no longer trust the timing of anything around you." The room went very still. Rain battered the windows in hard, slanted lines. Somewhere down the hall, a door shut. The generator hummed beneath the storm like a second heartbeat. Makeda should have looked away. She did not. "You think they'll try something again?" she said. "I think someone already has." The words entered her with alarming force, not because she had not thought them herself, but because hearing them aloud stripped away the last protection of uncertainty. She exhaled slowly. "Then maybe I should leave this." "No." The answer came too fast, too raw. Tendaji seemed to hear it himself a second later. His jaw tightened. "That's not an order. It's assessment. If you step away now, whoever's behind this learns intimidation works. And they become bolder." Makeda folded her arms lightly, more to steady herself than to challenge him. "You say that as if I'm a strategy." He looked at her then with a directness that made the room feel smaller still. "You are not a strategy." Silence. Lightning flashed white through the curtains. For the first time since the gala, whatever stood between them was no longer only investigation, suspicion, or gratitude. It was something more dangerous because neither of them had planned it. Weeks of restraint had built a tension too honest to hide and too inconvenient to name. The rich man and the mocked girl, the CEO and the woman his world had been trained not to see. Two people standing too close in a storm while truth pressed in from every direction. Makeda's voice came out quieter than she intended. Then what am I? Tendaji took one step closer. The answer when it came was almost rough. The one person in all of this who has not lied to me. That should have been only respect. It was not. She felt it in the air between them, in the way his gaze dropped for half a second to her mouth, and then returned to her eyes, as though even that brief betrayal of control irritated him. Makeda had known desire directed at other women all her life. The glamorous ones, the visible ones. Never like this. Never from a man who looked as if wanting something made him angrier at himself than deprivation ever could. A crash exploded from outside. Not thunder, closer, metal striking wood. They both turned. Then the lights cut out. Complete darkness swallowed the room, except for one pale knife of lightning from the window. Makeda froze. From the corridor came a woman's scream. Tendaji moved first. "Stay here!" He was already at the door when Makeda heard it a second sound beneath the storm. Footsteps. Fast. Retreating. No thought remained after that. She ran after him into the black hallway. The emergency lights failed to trigger. Doors opened along the corridor as frightened staff called out into darkness. Wind roared from somewhere deeper in the lodge, and then another shape lunged from the far end of the hall. Makeda did not think. She only saw the flash of raised metal in the attacker's hand and Tendaji turning a second too late. "Down," she shouted. She slammed into him with everything she had. The blow meant for his head struck her shoulder instead. Pain burst through her body like fire. Tendaji caught her before she hit the ground, and in the same motion drove forward into the attacker. The figure crashed into a service cart, swore, then fled into the dark, just as backup lights sputtered weakly to life. For one spinning second, all Makeda knew was pain his arms around her, the storm, and the brutal fact that someone had just tried to kill him again, or silence her, or both. Tendaji looked down at her, breathing hard, one hand braced against her back, the other tightening at her waist with a force that was no longer only protection. Makeda. Her name in his mouth sounded like fear and fury tangled together. "I'm fine," she lied. Blood was spreading beneath the torn shoulder of her blouse. His face changed, not into panic, into something deeper, more helpless, more human. And when the first emergency light finally steadied over them, neither of them seemed able to step out of each other's arms. The first thing Makeda became aware of was the smell of antiseptic. The second was pain, not the blinding explosion that had ripped through her shoulder in the corridor, but the slower, deeper kind, the ache left behind after fear had burned off, and the body was forced to count the cost honestly. She opened her eyes to a cream-colored ceiling and the low, uneven whir of a standing fan in the corner of the lodge's medical room. Morning light filtered through gauze curtains. Rain still tapped softly outside, but the violence of the night had passed. Everything now carried that strange, calm storms left behind, as if the world had spent its rage and was embarrassed by the silence after. Makeda tried to move and immediately hissed. A chair scraped. Tendaji stood from the corner. He had not changed clothes. His shirt from the night before was wrinkled sleeves still rolled, jaw darkened by stubble that made him look less like a polished CEO and more like a man who had sat awake for hours refusing to leave. For one long second, neither of them spoke. Then he crossed the room. "Don't sit up too quickly," he said. His voice was low from exhaustion. Makeda looked at the bandaged shoulder beneath the loose clinic gown they had put her in. "How bad?" "The blade grazed muscle," he said. "No fracture, no major vessel damage. The doctor says you were lucky." She let out a dry breath. That word is doing a lot of work. A faint, strained, almost smile touched his mouth and vanished. Memory returned in fragments. The dark hallway, the raised metal bar, the impact. Tendaji's arms catching her, the attacker running, fear pouring through the building like smoke. Makeda's eyes sharpened. Did they catch him? No. Disappointment landed hard inside her. Of course not. He wore maintenance coveralls and used the service staircase after the backup lights failed. By the time security locked the outer gates, the storm had already created too many blind spots. Tendaji's face hardened, but the attack was not random. Makeda looked at him. You're certain? Yes, because they had both been there, because she had seen the weapon swing where his head had been, because too many accidents had now stacked themselves into a shape no honest person could call coincidence. She lay still for a moment, then asked the question that mattered more than the rest. Who knows, the lodge doctor? My head of security. Ms. Delamini. He hesitated. And Zinhle. Makeda turned her face toward him fully. Why does Zinhle know? Because by the time we stabilized the situation, she had already heard there was an incident. She called before dawn. And you told her. I told her there was an attack, and that a staff member was injured. Makeda's mouth tightened. A staff member. He absorbed the accusation in her tone without flinching. I also told her nothing else. That should have helped. It did not. Because buried beneath the anger was something more humiliating disappointment that she had wanted him to say more, wanted him to say her name, wanted him to protect not only her body, but the truth of what she had become to him. That realization made her colder with herself than with him. Tendaji seemed to sense the shift, even if he could not know its full cause. He pulled the other chair closer and sat. The staff believe the power failure triggered panic, and you were hit by falling equipment in the corridor. Makeda looked at him sharply. That's the story. For now. She should have approved. The lie protected the investigation. It kept panic contained. It denied the attacker the public satisfaction of success. But something in her recoiled all the same. For now, she repeated, everything is always for now. He leaned forward slightly. What happened last night was not a rumor to be fed to a company already leaking from the inside. If the wrong people know how much we understand, they'll erase what remains before we can reach it. We. The word landed between them. Not you, not I. We. Makeda stared at the pale light on the wall behind him. You almost died because someone inside your world thinks truth is more dangerous than murder. His jaw tightened. Yes, and I almost died because I stepped between you and it. Yes. Silence. The room held it. Outside, distant voices drifted from the courtyard, where the convoy staff were likely preparing for departure. Someone laughed too loudly the way people did when they needed proof normal life still existed. Inside the room, normal life had already been left behind. Tendaji's voice, when it came again, was quieter. You should hate me a little. Makeda looked back at him, startled despite herself. For bringing you into this, he said. For not seeing the shape of it sooner. For letting you stand in the line of fire twice. She held his gaze. Do you hate myself? A humorless breath left him. At the moment, that list is crowded. Something in the answer broke the tension just enough for honesty to move. Makeda studied him. In the clean light of morning, stripped of the grandeur of his office and the choreography of power, he looked less untouchable than before, still formidable, still dangerous in the way disciplined men always were, but no longer made of polished distance. He looked like someone running out of places to hide from betrayal. She turned her eyes toward the bandage on her shoulder. When I was younger, I used to think powerful men were protected by their money. Then I grew up and realized money only buys better lies, better walls, Better lighting when the knife comes. Tendaji did not speak, so she continued surprising herself with the softness of her own voice. My father died in something my mother still refuses to name properly. There were papers, land signatures, officials' promises. Not one poor family in our area understood the whole thing, but all of us understood the ending. Graves, hunger, silence. She swallowed. That is what makes me angry with you. He listened without interruption. Not because you are cruel in the ordinary way, she said, but because men like you inherit buildings made from damage, and only call it tragedy when the damage turns back toward you. For a long moment he said nothing. Then carefully, as if the truth cost him something to give, he answered. You're right. Makeda had expected defense, or pride, or the polished remorse of rich men who confessed only when confession made them look evolved. What she had not expected was that plain answer. Just that. You're right. It hit her harder than argument would have. My father built this company from almost nothing after the civil contracts opened, Tendaji said. That is the story I was raised on. Discipline, intelligence, relentless work. The country respected him because he turned survival into empire. His eyes drifted briefly to the window. When I was old enough to understand balance sheets, I started seeing the other version. How some empires are built faster because other people are moved off the land first. How relief funds create reputations for the same men who helped manufacture the need for relief. Makeda listened very still. I told myself he continued that whatever rot came before me, I would clean it by making the company better than he did. Smarter, more accountable, less brutal. He looked back at her. Now I'm discovering that rot does not disappear because the sun dislikes the smell. It learns the sun's language and hides in his systems. There it was again. That dangerous honesty she had not expected from him. Not enough to make her trust completely, but enough to make distrust more difficult. Her shoulder throbbed. She shifted slightly and winced. He noticed at once. You shouldn't move like that. She gave him a tired look. I'm not decorating the room, Tendaji. I'm breathing. The use of his name changed something. Only slightly. But enough. He heard it. She saw him hear it. And suddenly the air between them no longer felt like patient and protector witness and target assistant and CEO. It felt like something stripped of titles. Two people who had stood too close to death together and lost the luxury of pretending not to matter to one another. Tendaji leaned back slowly, as though physical distance was easier to manage than whatever else had just entered the room. We leave for Lagos in an hour, he said. The doctor wants you monitored. I can arrange a private nurse at your home. Makeda let out a small, incredulous breath. A private nurse? In my neighborhood? Yes. She would last 6 minutes before the whole street decided I'd either married rich in secret or stolen from church. A shadow of amusement crossed his face, then disappeared as quickly as it came. I can move your mother and brother somewhere safer until this is finished. No. The refusal came instinctively. His expression hardened with concern. Makeda, no. She pushed herself a little more upright despite the pull in her shoulder. I know what you think safety looks like. Guards, apartments, drivers, private clinics. But people like me don't step into rich protection without paying for it later in gossip, suspicion, or dependence. I won't have my family turned into grateful hostages. His gaze held hers. Then reluctantly he nodded. All right. It should have ended there. But it did not, because neither of us moved, neither looked away. And under the exhaustion, under the investigation, under the bruises and bandages and everything broken around them, there remained the terrible, undeniable fact of last night, his body catching hers in the emergency lights, her blood on his hands, his voice on her name, as if losing her had frightened him more than the attack on himself. Makeda was the one who broke first, not by speaking, by letting her eyes drop for a heartbeat to his mouth. It was small, human, betraying, but he saw. Something shifted in his face. Control so natural to him in every other room seemed suddenly to cost effort. He stood not to leave, but because staying seated had become too intimate. The movement brought him closer to the bed by accident or by surrender. She could not tell which. "I should go," he said. "You probably should." Neither of them moved. The fan clicked overhead. Rain traced the windows. Then he did something far more dangerous than touching her. He reached out and brushed one finger very lightly against the edge of the bandage on her shoulder, as if confirming she was still real. Makeda's breath caught. His voice lowered. "You stepped in front of a weapon for me. So stop giving people reasons to aim at you." That should have made him smile. Instead, it undid him. Not dramatically, not with some grand confession. Just a fracture in his composure wide enough for need to show through. Need, gratitude, fear, and something warmer that had long since outgrown either of their permission. When he bent toward her, he did it slowly enough for refusal. She did not refuse. The kiss was not triumphant, not polished, not the beginning of a fairy tale. It was tired and restrained and far too honest. Two guarded people meeting in the wreckage of danger and finding for one impossible moment shelter in each other. His hand came to rest very carefully against the side of her face, never near the birthmark, with pity. Never with hesitation, only as though every part of her deserved the same gentleness. Makeda felt something inside her crack open at that. When he drew back, both of them were breathing differently. Both knew this changed everything. Both knew it changed nothing outside the room. Tendaji rested his forehead briefly against hers, eyes closed for the space of one fractured second, then stepped away before desire could grow reckless. "We say nothing," he said. Makeda hated that he was right. "Yes," she whispered. "We finish this first." "Yes." He looked at her one last time, and in that look she saw it all promise restraint and the beginning of a love far more dangerous than either of them had room for. Then he left, and Makeda alone again in the pale room with pain in her shoulder and his warmth still ghosting against her mouth, understood with sudden terrifying clarity that the storm had not ended. It had only moved inside her. By the time Makeda returned to Lagos, the city looked unchanged. Traffic still choked the roads in long, angry lines. Hawkers still moved between cars, selling cold water, roasted ground nuts, chargers, phone cards, anything a restless hand might buy for relief. Billboards still promised luxury towers, imported skin care, private schools, faster futures. The same city, the same noise, the same imbalance dressed up as normal life. And yet everything inside her had shifted. Her shoulder remained strapped beneath her blouse, a hidden wound that burned when the car jolted too hard or when she lifted her arm too quickly. But the deeper ache was not physical. It was the knowledge that she had crossed some invisible border and could not uncross it. She had been poor before, mocked before, used before. Those things were familiar. What was new, dangerously new, was that she now carried secrets powerful enough to shake a company built on old money, public praise, and buried harm. Worse still, she carried the memory of Tendaji's mouth on hers. That memory stayed with her in humiliating, inconvenient flashes. In the quiet between files, in the dimness before sleep. In the moment her fingers drifted once traitorously to the edge of the bandage on her shoulder, because that was where his hand had hovered with unbearable care. She hated herself a little for that. Not because the kiss had been wrong, because it had been real. Reality was always the most expensive thing for a woman like her to believe in. On Monday morning, Tendaji did not come to the foundation floor. He sent no message, no signal, no private acknowledgement of the storm-soaked confession their silence now had to contain. Makeda told herself that was best, sensible, necessary. And when disappointment still moved coldly beneath her ribs, she was angry enough with herself to work twice as hard. By noon, she had finished cross-checking 2 housing grant summaries and a maternal clinic supply ledger. The inconsistencies were everywhere, once she knew the rhythm of them. Small fractions pulled from large totals, delayed approvals, backdated to appear clean. Donor references, copied with 1 digit, changed. Theft disguised as bureaucracy. Cruelty disguised as paperwork. At 1:30, Mrs. Nkubi appeared beside her desk. "Mr. Okoro would like you in conference room 7. Makeda looked up. Now Mrs. Nkube gave the smallest nod. "Bring nothing." That last instruction made the hairs at the back of Makeda's neck lift. Conference room 7 was not one of the glass-walled meeting rooms junior staff were allowed to book. It sat at the far end of the executive corridor with darker wood, better soundproofing, and the kind of silence that existed only where decisions expensive enough to ruin lives were made. When Makeda entered, Tendaji was not alone. Ms. Dlamini sat at the oval table, expression severe behind silver-framed glasses. Beside her was a thin, elderly man Makeda had never met, but instantly recognized as legal, too still, too neat, too practiced at listening without appearing to listen. Another folder lay open in front of Tendaji. He looked up when she entered, and for one small, dangerous second, something unguarded flashed in his eyes, relief perhaps that she had come safely. Then the boardroom mask returned. "Sit," he said. Makeda sat. Tendaji slid a photocopied land registry form across the table. This came from an archived legal transfer box that was never digitized. Makeda looked down. At first, the document meant nothing. Parcel numbers, boundary notes, municipal stamps blurred by age. Then her eyes found a name handwritten in the margin. E. Nwosu. Her father. The room seemed to tilt. She went very still. "Where did you get this?" she asked. The elderly lawyer answered, voice soft and dry. "From a dormant file attached to a compulsory acquisition dispute 17 years ago. The file should have been marked closed. It was not. Someone removed supporting witness statements, but not every cross-reference." Makeda lifted her eyes slowly to Tendaji. He did not soften the truth before handing it to her. "The land seizure tied to your father's death passed through a shell partner financed by one of my father's old construction subsidiaries." The words hit like a physical blow. Makeda stared at him. No one spoke. In the silence, old fragments rose inside her with new shape. Her mother refusing to explain properly. The whispered word demolition. The fear whenever official-looking men came through the neighborhood. The way her father's name had been spoken less and less over time, as if memory itself could invite punishment. Her mouth went dry. "Your family took our land." Tendaji's jaw tightened. "My father's business structure was involved in the acquisition chain. That is not the same sentence, and you know it." "No," he said quietly. "It isn't." Makeda's fingers pressed into the document so hard, the page crumpled slightly. "And you tell me now. I tell you now because I did not know before." Her laugh came out low and broken. "Do rich sons ever know before, or only after the damage grows teeth and turns around?" Ms. Dlamini shifted but stayed silent. The lawyer lowered his gaze to the table, wisely understanding that truth was moving here in a form legal training could not improve. Tendaji took the blow without defending himself. "You have every right to hate what this company did." "Hate," Makeda shot back. "You speak as if this is a moral discomfort. My father died. My mother spent years shrinking from every knock on the door. My brother grew up on medicine money that was never enough. I worked in rooms where people laughed at my face while men in suits probably built their reputations on the graves of families like mine. Her voice had risen. She did not care. The shoulder wound pulled sharply, but anger overrode pain. And all this time she went on. I was inside your building, helping you clean up theft from a foundation that may have existed to whitewash the same blood underneath it. Tendaji's expression did not crack, but something darker entered it. Yes. That one word given without excuse made fury twist more painfully inside her. She wanted him arrogant, wanted him defensive, wanted something simple to strike against. Instead, he sat there and accepted the ugliness of inheritance without trying to aestheticize it. That was harder to survive. Makeda shoved the land document back toward him. What else? Tendaji opened the second folder. This, he said, is where it becomes worse. He turned several pages and stopped on a memo bearing an old internal legal stamp. Not signed, but initialed. One set of initials repeated across 3 separate attachments. Kebikwame Biko. Makeda frowned. He was involved back then. The elderly lawyer finally spoke again. At the time, Mr. Biko was a junior legal assistant attached to the acquisitions desk. Not senior enough to direct policy, but senior enough to move files, suppress correspondence, and learn which kinds of paper disappear quietly. Tendaji's face hardened. The witness statements removed from your father's file were logged out under an authorization code that later appears in procurement reviews tied to present-day foundation funds. Makeda stared. The room narrowed around that fact. Not one crime, a bridge between crimes. Old land theft, dead witnesses, missing compensation records, modern charity fraud, sabotaged safety inspections, attempted murder. All threaded by the same man growing older and richer inside the machinery he had learned to corrupt when he was still young enough to call himself harmless. Kwame has been feeding on the same wound for years, Makeda whispered. Yes, Tendaji said. And your father knew? Tendaji's eyes dropped briefly to the page, then rose again. I don't know if he knew everything. I do know he signed final approvals on the acquisition cluster, and I know he later made private payments to certain displaced families through intermediaries. Makeda blinked. Private payments, not public compensation, not admission of wrongdoing. Quiet money. The kind meant to buy silence rather than justice. Her throat tightened. That sounded exactly like the sort of thing powerful, guilty men did when they wanted the stain cleaned without ever naming the blood. The lawyer reached carefully into his case and placed one more document on the table. A payment authorization stub. Partial name of recipient redacted by time and damage. But not enough. Adeswa Nobu Makeda stopped breathing. My mother, she said. No one contradicted her. 1,000 small mysteries of her childhood suddenly rearranged themselves with brutal clarity. The years when rent had been barely possible, but somehow still paid. The days her mother would go quiet after visits from strangers. The shame. The secrecy. The refusal to tell the children where certain money had come from. Not charity. Silence money. Makeda felt sick. She knew she whispered. Not everything, but enough. Tendaji spoke carefully. She may have taken it to keep you alive. Makeda turned to him with pain bright in her eyes. Do not ask me to be gentle with this. I'm not. Then don't defend it. I'm not defending it, he said. And now his own restraint showed strain. I'm trying to tell you what poverty forces people to swallow when the alternative is watching their children starve. That landed too close to truth to reject cleanly. Makeda's anger faltered for just one dangerous second under the weight of memory. Her mother counting pills into halves, choosing rent over protein, selling her wedding cloth piece by piece, without ever explaining where the first extra money had come from. Survival had always demanded humiliations the dead did not have to witness. She closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them again, the fury had changed shape. Less wild, more lethal. "What is the plan?" she asked. Ms. Delamini answered this time. "We now have linkage motive and archival trail, but still not enough to survive a public board confrontation unless we secure present-day financial transfer proof and evidence tying Kwame directly to the sabotage." Makeda looked at Tendaji. "And Zinle?" That name altered the room's temperature again. Tendaji folded his hands slowly. "We traced 2 private transfers from a discretionary hospitality account linked to vendors she recommended. The same vendor network overlaps with one of Kwame's shell procurement routes." "Recommended," Makeda repeated. "That's a careful word. It is the only honest one I have today." She studied him. "You still don't know whether she is greedy, careless, or fully involved." "No," he admitted. "But she knows enough to be dangerous." Makeda's mind moved quickly now, grief and rage sharpening rather than blurring it. "Then don't corner Kwame first." 3 faces turned toward her. She continued, voice steadying as the structure formed. "If Kwame senses the archival link is exposed, he'll burn whatever present-day records remain. But Zinli is vain. She won't think in terms of legal containment. She'll think in terms of reputation and possession." Makeda leaned forward despite the protest in her shoulder. "Make her believe she's about to win." Tendaji's gaze sharpened. "Explain. Give her something public, something that makes her greedy and careless. A leadership role, a foundation announcement. Access, she thinks, confirms her power." Makeda felt the shape of the trap as she spoke it. "If she's tied to Kwame, she'll move to secure herself before the spotlight grows. That movement will expose the channel." Ms. Delamini let out a slow breath. "That could work." The lawyer nodded once, reluctant but impressed. Tendaji did not speak immediately. He was looking at Makeda, not as a rescued girl, not as a wounded employee, not even as the woman he had kissed in the aftermath of violence. He was looking at her as something rarer, an equal in war. And because of everything they had just uncovered, the blood in the past, the money in her mother's hands, the company bearing his name like a wound, there was heartbreak in that recognition too. Makeda saw it. He saw that she saw it. Neither of them mentioned the kiss. Neither dared. But beneath the documents and strategy and inherited shame, another truth stood between them now, stripped raw and terrible. Their lives had not collided by accident. The man she had saved belonged to the family whose empire had helped destroy hers, and the child of the dead man and the son of the living empire were now the 2 people most necessary to bringing the whole thing down. Makeda rose slowly from her chair. "What happens after we expose him?" she asked. Tendaji stood too. For a moment he seemed about to answer as CEO with procedure, legal sequencing, public statements. Instead, he answered as a man who knew no victory ahead could be clean. After he said quietly, "We learn whether justice can still be something more than money arriving too late." The trap was set 5 days later. Not with handcuffs, not with police, not even with accusation. Men like Kwame Biko survived because they understood how to hide behind procedure. Women like Zinle survived because they understood how to hide behind image. If Tendaji wanted them exposed cleanly, he could not drag them into scandal too early. He had to do something far more difficult. He had to let them feel safe. So the Okoro Group announced a live press event. Official title, A New Era for the Children's Recovery Fund. Public meaning, reform expansion, renewed commitment to vulnerable families. Private meaning, bait. By noon, the main event hall on the 28th floor had transformed into the kind of polished spectacle wealthy institutions used to cleanse themselves in front of cameras. Backdrop screens glowed with soft blue branding. Floral arrangements stood at the edges of the stage, tasteful enough to suggest humanity, expensive enough to remind everyone who paid for it. Journalists moved between rows of chairs, testing audio levels and arranging tripods. Influencers invited for social impact coverage adjusted their makeup in dark phone screens. Executives circulated with rehearsed concern on their faces. Everything about it looked noble. Makeda hated that. She stood in a side preparation room wearing a simple cream dress Mrs. Nkube had chosen because it was elegant without looking like luxury. Her shoulder had healed enough to move without obvious pain, though certain motions still tugged sharply beneath the skin. Her stomach had been unsettled for days now, waves of dizziness, sudden nausea, a heaviness. She kept blaming on stress and irregular meals. She had not yet gone to a doctor. There had been no room in her life for one more truth. Ms. Dlamini adjusted the fall of the dress at Makeda's sleeve and stepped back. "You look like a woman who belongs in the room." Makeda gave a faint, humorless smile. "That has never stopped people from resenting it." "No," Ms. Dlamini said. "But today, resentment may be useful." Across the room, Tendaji stood near the mirror, fastening his cufflinks. He wore charcoal instead of black, perhaps to look less severe for the cameras, though nothing about him truly softened under cloth. The past week had stripped him further. He seemed sharper now, leaner somehow, as if betrayal had burned away whatever remained ornamental in him. When he looked at Makeda, the room narrowed around that glance for one unguarded second. Then the public mask returned. They had hardly been alone since Conference Room 7. Too many moving parts, too much danger, too much history newly exposed between them. And yet the memory of that one kiss had not weakened under distance. It had intensified, because now it sat beside everything else, his father's sins, her mother's silence, Quam's decades of corruption, Zinle's hovering malice, the attempted murder at the lodge. Desire under ordinary circumstances might have been confusing. Desire under these circumstances felt almost cruel. Mrs. Nkube entered carrying a tablet. "The media line is full. The board members have arrived." Zinle is already seated in the front holding area. Makeda looked up. Already, Mrs. Nkube's mouth tightened very slightly. She believes today is hers. Good, Makeda thought. That was exactly the point. The formal agenda had been crafted with surgical care. Tendaji would open with remarks about reform and transparency. Then he would announce an expanded governance structure for the foundation. He had privately allowed word to circulate that Zinle was likely to be named honorary co-chair of the new Children's Initiative, an image-rich title with enough implied influence to feed her vanity and enough public weight to make her move quickly if she had anything to hide. Quam, meanwhile, had been invited to sit on stage as Group Operations Director to speak about implementation integrity. Makeda almost admired the cruelty of that. Almost. The real pressure point came last, an unscheduled special testimony segment inserted into the live program minutes before publication. Only 3 people knew its full purpose: Tendaji, Ms. Dlamini, and Makeda. The special testimony was her. Not because she wanted the spotlight. Because predators built their safety on the assumption that poor women would either stay quiet or speak too emotionally to be believed. Today she intended to disappoint them in both directions. Mrs. Nkube checked the tablet again. 5 minutes. When everyone else stepped away to make final adjustments, Makeda found herself briefly alone with Tendaji near the side exit curtain. The muffled swell of the audience came through the wall. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Tendaji said quietly, "You can still step back." Makeda turned to him. "Can I?" He held her gaze. "If you want to." "No," she said. "I don't think I can." Something moved in his expression. Not relief exactly, but pride edged with sorrow. "This becomes public once it starts," he said. "They'll tear at you for it. Your past, your family, your face. Everything." Makeda's mouth curved without warmth. "They already do. That's not what I mean." She knew. He meant scale, media, power, the way wealthy people turned character assassination into a profession when truth inconvenienced them. Makeda took a slow breath. My mother spent years swallowing money stained by the men who helped bury my father. I spent years apologizing for surviving in rooms that laughed at me. I'm done shrinking. Her voice softened, but only slightly. If I'm afraid now, let it at least be in the direction of something worthy. For one dangerous second, he almost reached for her. She saw it. So did he. His hand closed instead at his side. Then a production assistant opened the side curtain. Mr. Okoro, they're ready. The hall beyond was bright enough to feel surgical. Tendaji stepped onto the stage, first applause rising immediately. Camera flashes punctured the air. Makeda remained behind the curtain, able to see the audience in fragments. Board members in measured rows, media clustered at the back. Zinla in ivory silk, radiant and composed in the front section, already wearing victory on her face. Kwame 3 seats away from the stage stairs, immaculate as ever, his expression the polished calm of a man who believed he still understood the architecture of the room. He did not. Tendaji took the podium. His opening remarks were perfect, measured remorse for recent internal inconsistencies. Language of accountability. Children's welfare, ethical stewardship. A renewed future. The audience relaxed exactly as intended. Investors nodded, journalists typed, social media cameras lifted. Then came the first shift. With immediate effect, Tendaji said the Children's Recovery Fund will enter a visible leadership transition to restore public confidence. A murmur passed through the room. Zinla straightened slightly. Makeda watched her from behind the curtain and saw hunger flash under the elegance. Not love for children, not commitment to reform. Possession. Public position. Proximity to moral capital. Perfect. In recognition of her long-standing public support of our family initiatives, Tendaji continued. Miss Zinhle Adeyemi has been asked to step forward as the face of this next phase. Applause broke out. Zinla smiled and rose with beautiful calculated humility, pausing just long enough for cameras to feast on her profile before gliding toward the stage. Kwame clapped too, though Makeda saw the slight tension in his jaw. He had not been expecting this exact configuration. Good. Surprise loosened careful people. Zinla reached the stage and accepted Tendaji's extended hand. To anyone watching, it looked like confirmation of her assent. A future wife beside a future legacy project. Grace. Elegance. Continuity. Then Tendaji did not release the microphone. Before Miss Adeyemi addresses the room, he said there is one more voice this transition requires. That was the pivot. The audience quieted. Zinla's smile held but thinner now. Tendaji looked toward the side curtain. Please welcome Miss Makeda Nwosu. The room changed. Not loudly, but completely. Makeda stepped into the light. For half a second, the audience did not understand what they were seeing. Then recognition rippled in waves. The gala girl, the one from the headlines, the plain-faced waitress, the new employee, the woman rumor had been circling for weeks. Makeda felt all of it hit her skin at once and kept walking. Zinle's expression froze. Kwame's did something worse. It remained calm. Too calm. Predators were most dangerous in the instant before they decided whether to flee or strike. Makeda reached the podium's second microphone. Tendaji stepped slightly aside, not abandoning her, not shielding her. Simply making space. That mattered. She began without notes. My name is Makeda Nwosu, she said, voice clear enough to carry to the back wall. Some of you know me as the woman who saved Mr. Okoro at the gala. Some of you know me as a new assistant in the foundation office. Most of you do not know me at all. Silence deepened. I grew up in communities like the ones this fund claims to protect. I know what emergency aid means when medicine runs out before payday. I know what housing relief means when families are moved off land with promises and left with paperwork instead of justice. At that, several bored faces tightened. Good. Makeda continued. Over the past weeks while working inside the Foundation division, I noticed repeated inconsistencies in project allocations, disbursement records, supplier timelines, and authorization trails. Those inconsistencies were not accidental. A stir ran through the room now. Journalists sat straighter, cameras lifted higher. Zinli turned slightly toward Tendaji, voice low and sharp enough for the front rows to hear. "What is this?" He did not answer her. Makeda went on. "Today I am not here to accuse without evidence. I am here because evidence exists." Tendaji raised one hand. Screens behind the stage changed. The Okoro Group logo vanished. In its place appeared a sequence of documents. Donor pledges, beside altered internal transfer dates, duplicated procurement invoices, Shell vendor overlap charts, archived land acquisition cross-references, and finally, one transaction map that linked discretionary hospitality accounts to vendor routes touching both Zinli's recommended event channels and Kwame Biko's procurement network. The audience erupted. Not physically, not yet, but in sound gasps, shouts, chairs, scraping a dozen journalists speaking at once. Kwame stood. "This is outrageous." His outrage came a fraction too fast. Zinla took one step back from the screen, color draining beneath her foundation makeup as she spotted familiar vendor names. Tendaji's voice sliced through the noise. "Sit down, Kwame." It was not a request. Kwame did not sit. Instead, he laughed once sharply. "You're letting a nobody from the slums narrate accounting data she cannot possibly understand." The insult hung in the air. Makeda looked at him. Then she answered with terrible calm. "A nobody from the slums noticed what your auditors missed because nobody taught you to imagine we could read." The room reacted audibly. Kwame's control slipped just for a second. "Enough." The elderly lawyer from Conference Room 7 stepped onto the side platform, holding certified copies of the archival records. Ms. Delamini followed with internal access logs and the restored ballroom maintenance chain. One of Tendaji's security leads moved quietly into position near the aisle. Zinli found her voice first. "Tendaji, whatever you think this is, I had nothing to do with those files." "No," he said, turning to her at last. "Then perhaps you'd like to explain the private vendor transfers routed through your personal recommendations." Her face changed, not into innocence, into calculation. "They were event disbursements," she snapped. "Everyone knows I help coordinate hospitality." "Hospitality for children's recovery funds?" Ms. Delamini asked coldly. Laughter broke from somewhere in the press rows, harsh, delighted, merciless. Zinhla's head whipped toward the sound. That was when fear truly reached her, and fear made her careless. "You said this was contained," she hissed. She had meant it for Kwame, but her microphone was live. The hall detonated. Reporters surged half out of their seats. Cameras swung toward Kwame. Someone shouted for security. Someone else demanded financial statements. Board members turned on one another in open panic. Kwame lunged toward the stage steps. Security moved at once. He shoved one guard hard enough to stagger him and tried for the side exit, but the second guard caught him at the shoulder. Papers scattered. Zinle screamed his name, too intimate, too revealing, too late. And in the middle of the chaos, as the empire split open under lights, it had paid for itself. A sharper wave of dizziness slammed into Makeda. She gripped the podium. The room tilted. Tendaji was at her side instantly. "Makeda!" She tried to say she was fine. Instead, nausea rose hard and fast. The fluorescent light sharpened to a blade. Her knees almost gave. Mrs. Nkube appeared with water, but Makeda barely registered it. A doctor from the company medical team, already on site for press liability, was being pushed urgently through the front row by security. Everything blurred. She heard pieces only. "Get her seated. Pulse is fast." "When did you last eat?" Then the doctor looked up from where he had knelt beside her chair. His expression shifted. from clinical concern to startled calculation. He turned to Tendaji. "Sir," he said carefully, "I believe she may be pregnant." The hall, already in chaos, seemed to split into a new silence. Makeda stared at him. Pregnant. The word struck her not as a surprise, but as the sudden unlocking of everything her body had been trying to say, while her mind had been too consumed by war to listen. A week later at the private clinic, the fuller truth would come. Not one heartbeat. 3. But even here, even now, before the numbers were spoken, before certainty had shape, she saw Tendaji's face change, not with fear, not with doubt, with a depth of protective wonder so raw it almost hurt to look at. And somewhere behind them, while security forced Kwame to the ground and microphones still caught Zinhle's broken denials, justice kept unfolding beneath the lights, messy, public, irreversible. 3 weeks after the press conference, the city had chosen its version of the story. The headlines were everywhere. Okoro Group fraud exposed live on stage. Operations director arrested in charity scandal. Socialite Zinhle Adeyemi denies role in fund diversion. The ugly girl who saved the CEO changes everything. Makeda hated that last one. Not because it hurt, because it was too small. As if the greatest miracle in the story was that a mocked woman had become visible once a powerful man looked at her long enough. As if courage needed his gaze to count. As if truth had not been living inside her long before cameras finally learned her name. Still, the world always preferred a simpler fable. It was easier to digest than the real one. The real one had blood under the paperwork. The real one had a dead father, a frightened mother. Stolen land, stolen funds, 2 attempted murders, and a corporation forced to look at the rot beneath its own polished floors. The real one had 3 heartbeats growing quietly inside a woman who had never once planned her life around rescue. Makeda sat by the clinic window with both hands folded over her stomach and watched late afternoon sunlight slide across the glass. Triplets. Even after the scan, even after the doctor's cautious smile and Mrs. Nakub's stunned silence and Tendaji's complete inability to speak for several seconds, the truth still felt surreal. Not 1 child. 3. The doctor had explained things carefully. Higher risk, close monitoring, nutrition, rest, blood work, regular scans. Makeda had heard the words and understood them, but part of her remained suspended in the first instant she had seen those tiny moving forms on the screen and realized her body had become a future larger than fear. She heard the office door open behind her. She did not turn immediately. She knew his footsteps now. Tendaji crossed the room quietly and stopped beside her chair. "You left before the dietitian finished threatening me." That finally pulled a smile from her. Small, but real. "She was not threatening you. She told me that if I allowed you to miss appointments because of work stress or stubbornness, she would personally make sure my name entered every obstetric gossip circle in Lagos." Makeda glanced up at him. "I like her already." He looked tired, not broken, not defeated, but worn in the honest way people became after weeks of consequence. Legal review committees, emergency board sessions, public statements, asset freezes, forensic audits, police interviews, investor panic, community outrage. Everything that should have happened years ago happening all at once because truth had finally been dragged into light hard enough to stay there. And still, when he looked at her now, the exhaustion in him altered, softened around the edges. Not because she was fragile. He had long since stopped making that mistake. Because she mattered. He took the seat across from her and set a folder on the small table between them. "Kwame has been formally charged." Makeda's eyes lowered to the folder. "All of it? Not all yet. Enough to hold him." Tendaji leaned back slowly. "Financial fraud. Procurement manipulation. Evidence suppression. Conspiracy tied to the gala sabotage and the lodge attack. The prosecution thinks more will follow once they pressure the contractors he used. Makeda absorbed that in silence. "What about Zinle?" she asked. A shadow crossed his face. "Accessory exposure is likely. Financial misconduct is possible. Direct knowledge is harder to prove." His voice cooled. "She has spent the last 2 weeks trying to reinvent herself as a woman misled by ambitious men." Makeda let out a quiet breath that was almost a laugh. "And is anyone buying it? Only the kind of people who mistake jewelry for innocence?" That answer pleased her more than it should have. He studied her for a moment, then added, "She also denied the fake pregnancy." Makeda looked up sharply. Denied, yes, until the medical records contradicted her. For a second, anger flickered fresh inside Makeda, not because Zinle had lied. That no longer surprised her, because there had once been a possibility, however false, that another woman's unborn child had stood near this story, and even that had been turned into a weapon. Some people, Makeda said quietly, should never be allowed near motherhood. Tendaji did not respond right away. When he did, his voice had changed. Lower, closer to feeling than statement. "You will be an extraordinary mother." The words landed so gently that they hurt. Makeda looked away first. The room fell quiet around them. Beneath her palms, nothing could yet be felt from the outside. It was too early, too delicate, too new. But inside, life was already insisting on itself in secret. 3 children, his children, their children. The thought still frightened her sometimes, not because she doubted the babies, but because she had spent too many years learning that love could be interrupted by class, by power, by inheritance, by shame, by history arriving late with teeth. She turned back to him. "And what exactly are we supposed to do now?" "Tendaji." He held her gaze. Not CEO to employee, not benefactor to beneficiary, man to woman, parent to parent. "First," he said, "we tell your mother everything she deserves to hear from me directly." Makeda went very still. That had to happen. She knew it. And yet the idea of Tendaji sitting in their small house in front of the woman whose life his father's empire had helped wound felt almost too heavy to imagine. He seemed to read some of that on her face. "I am not going there to ask for forgiveness," he said. "I have no right to ask that from her. I'm going to tell the truth, to acknowledge what my family's company did, to tell her what I intend to repair and what I cannot." Makeda looked at him for a long moment, then nodded once, and after that she asked. He opened the folder. Inside were the restructuring documents for the foundation. Independent external oversight, community-led verification boards, survivor representation on compensation review panels, a land restitution inquiry fund, medical and education support units no longer controlled solely by corporate discretion. At the bottom of the first page was a highlighted line, "Interim Community Accountability Director, proposed Makeda Nwosu." She stared at it. "I'm pregnant with triplets," she said flatly. "This is not the time to offer me an empire." "It is not an empire," he said. "It's work you were already doing before anyone bothered to title it." She kept staring at the page. "I don't want to become your company's morality decoration," she said at last. His answer came immediately. "Then don't." Her eyes lifted. "If you take that role," he said, "it will be because no one in that building has better instincts for what has been hidden, and no one has more right to insist the repair be real. If you refuse, I'll still implement the oversight structure. But I would rather build the future with the person who bled to expose the past." It was an almost unbearable sentence, because it did not flatter her. It saw her. Makeda closed the folder slowly. "You say things like that too calmly. It's the only way I can say them without forgetting how much I want to say instead." Heat rose faintly into her face. Even now, after everything, he could still unsettle her with honesty more than charm ever would. 2 days later, he came to her home. Not with a convoy, not with photographers, not with an assistant carrying flowers and polished excuses. He came with Mrs. Ncube, one driver waiting outside, and the full visible awkwardness of a wealthy man stepping into a street where children paused their games to stare, and neighbors pretended not to watch from doorways. Inside the one-room house, Adesua sat straighter than Makeda had seen in months. Tino looked as if he were trying to decide whether to admire Tendaji or interrogate him. Makeda stood near the wall, heart knocking against her ribs harder than it had during some of the more dangerous moments in the investigation, because this somehow felt even more exposed. Truth in a boardroom was strategy. Truth in a poor family's home was judgment. Tendaji did not sit until Adesua invited him. When he finally spoke, he spoke plainly. He named what the old company structures had done. He acknowledged the acquisition chain, the hidden payments, the silence, money, the failure of justice. He did not ask to be separated from his father's name. He did not ask to be praised for being different. He only told her what had been uncovered, what action had been taken, what restitution process was being opened, and what his responsibility now was toward Makeda and the children. When he said children, Tino nearly stopped breathing. Adesua closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them again, there were tears in them, but not soft tears. Furious, exhausted ones. The kind that had been denied ceremony for too many years. "My husband is dead," she said quietly. "No money will return him. No public apology will return the years fear took from us." Tendaji bowed his head once. "I know." "You do not know," she corrected. "But perhaps for the first time you are no longer pretending you do." The room held still. Then Adesua looked toward Makeda. Not at Tendaji, at her daughter. And in that look, Makeda understood something she had not allowed herself to hope for. This was not going to be decided as a transaction between powerful men and damaged families. It was going to be decided where it always should have been, in the dignity of those who had survived. "If you choose him," Adesua said softly, "choose him because he tells the truth after it costs him. Not because he is rich enough to make your suffering comfortable." Makeda felt tears press behind her eyes and hated them a little. Because her mother was right. Because this was the measure. Not whether Tendaji loved her in private. Whether he remained truthful when truth stripped him in public. Months passed. The cases moved. The compensation program opened. Families came forward. The company's old stories cracked, one after another. Makeda did not move into Tendaji's world like a fairy tale bride. Instead, he spent more time stepping into hers, clinic visits, food markets, when security could be managed discreetly. Long evenings in her mother's house, where Tino asked merciless questions, and Adesua watched him with the stern caution of a woman who had no intention of confusing sincerity with redemption too quickly. That more than any grand declaration changed him. By the time Makeda's labor came, the rainy season had softened into a bright, washed morning. It was long, exhausting, painful in ways language could not improve. Tendaji stayed through every hour of it, not pacing like a wealthy man unused to helplessness, but present steady hand-wet cloth, whispered instructions repeated back to nurses without needing to dominate the room. When the first cry came, he broke, not visibly to others, perhaps, but Makeda saw it. Then the second, then the third. 3 babies, 3 furious, impossible children. When the nurses laid them against her one by one, Makeda felt something larger than vindication move through her, larger even than healing. Continuation, not of the wound, of life beyond it. Weeks later, when the photographs inevitably surfaced, Makeda holding 1 baby while 2 slept in a bassinet beside her. Tendaji standing close, Adesua seated nearby with the expression of a queen who had survived a siege. The public again tried to turn it into a simple fable. Ugly girl becomes beloved mother. CEO finds true love. Justice wins. But inside the quiet truth of their home, they all knew better. Justice had not arrived whole. It had been fought for piece by piece. Love had not descended like magic. It had been tested by history and chosen anyway. And Makeda had not become beautiful because the world finally approved of her. She had always been beautiful in the only ways that lasted through courage, honesty, endurance, and a heart that kept choosing life even when life had given her every reason not to. One night as the triplets slept and city rain whispered against the windows, Tendaji stood behind her with one hand resting lightly at her waist. "Do you ever think about that first night?" he asked. Makeda smiled faintly. "The one where everyone looked through me until the ceiling almost killed you." He let out a quiet breath that might have been a laugh. "Yes." She leaned back slightly into him. "I think the ceiling was the first honest thing in that room. It fell exactly where the lies were." He was silent for a second. "Then, and you," she looked toward the sleeping children. "I think," she said softly, "no one noticed me because they had already decided what mattered." Then truth forced them to look again. Tendaji bent and pressed a kiss to her temple. Outside, the city remained imperfect. Inside, healing did not mean forgetting. It meant building something tender enough to outlive what had tried to destroy them. And this time, at last, the future belonged to the ones who had earned it.